Welcome, everyone. This is Higher Discourse. This is the show where we talk about the infinite positive possibilities of our shared future and what's holding us back. In this first episode, we'll tackle the obvious question: what exactly is higher discourse, and what can we hope to accomplish here on this show? Let's talk about it. So in this first episode, just to give you a quick heads up, fair warning, I tend to be a little long-winded at times, especially when I'm passionate about a specific subject. And I am passionate about this podcast and what I hope to accomplish here. So I did attempt several times to make this first episode as short as possible, but obviously I failed. So what I ended up doing, I just sort of spliced all of those attempts together into one episode. That being said, the most concise and shortened version of this sort of TLDR, I went on ahead and put at the very beginning for those of you who are limited on time. So I realized recently when talking to a friend that I actually needed an elevator pitch for what higher discourse is. I told him I was doing a podcast or starting one, and he said, "Oh, what's it about?" And my mind went blank because I couldn't think of a quick answer, and we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk. So I think I'm going to put that in here at the beginning, where I just have a quick TLDR of what this podcast is, so that it's a little bit easier to swallow. That way, here at the very beginning of the episode, you could get an idea of what higher discourse means, at least to the host, and what you can expect here on this podcast. Obviously, the entire episode will be about that, but at least here in the beginning, I'll have a very compressed version so that if you don't like it, if this is not what you're into, if this isn't your thing, you can go on about your day without wasting an entire who knows how long this episode will be, just to figure out what it is higher discourse is about. This is a podcast about questioning what it takes to actually make a difference in this world, a significant difference. What does it take to change things from the way they are now? I'd like to see a complete, from the ground up, redesign of this entire system as we see it. I'd like to see a world without homelessness, without hunger, and without war. And I think that's possible. And I think it's possible in a single human lifetime. So the real question from there is, if I think it's possible, if I know it's possible, how do we get there? Furthermore, beyond how we get there, how does the average person, someone like myself, who has a job, who isn't necessarily a protester or an activist, how do we come together and start having a discussion about what we're doing here in this world and how we can make the world a better place? There's so many things I think we are capable of that I think we're not talking about and we're not coming together about. And I'd like to make a difference personally in that coming together, in that unity. I think that in a lot of ways, our political discourse and our social discourse is starting to sort of collapse in a way. And I think that it's no longer productive, but furthermore, I think it's counterproductive. I think it's actually beginning to descend in a lot of ways. And I think that I want to make a difference in that area. So the hyper compressed version of this conversation is, what does it take to end homelessness? What does it take to end hunger? Can we see an end to the wars we see around the world? What does it take? How do we get there? So world peace is possible. A world without hunger is possible. A world without homelessness is possible. And it's really, if we're being honest, no longer a question about how we get there. It's more a question of what's holding us back. What's preventing and stopping these things from happening, and sort of unpacking and decrypting that code is what we need to be talking about. Some of the subjects may range anywhere from what's holding you back as an individual from being your best self, all the way to what's holding us back as a people, as a group. Why can't we be better? Why aren't we better? What's holding us back? What's preventing that unity? You know, I'll be honest, I think in a lot of ways, most people are good people. And people who aren't so-called good, I think, are more so damaged than outright bad. I think that in many ways, if you were to put a magic button in front of people, your average person, and said, hey, this magic button, if you press it, you'll end homelessness worldwide, I think most people would press that button. As long as that button didn't have some preloaded sort of label heavy bullshit attached to it, I think most people would press that button. I think that's who we are. I think most people, your average person, if they don't have mental health issues or some other scars or damage, they would push that button. If they had a button pushed in front of them and said, hey, listen, if you push this button, you will personally end all cancer. It's over. You fixed it. Cured immediately. I think many people, most people, would push that button. But when you start attaching that button to a political party, when you start attaching that button to some sort of ideology, I think in so many ways, that's when suddenly it becomes an argument about whether we should push the button or not. Is this okay? Should we do it? Should they do it? Who's going to do it first? It's our team and their team. They're the bad guys. They're pushing the button for the wrong reason. I think in so many ways, we lose sight of the objective, the goal, the purpose. And I think we get lost in an argument about each other. We get lost in an argument of hatred and division, and we don't get enough jobs done in terms of improving our lives here, in terms of, improving the human experience. I think that we all, in so many ways, probably agree on so many things, but it's how to get there that we become divided. So what I want to focus on here is, how do we work around that? How do we overcome that? How do we circumvent and outflank that? There's something wrong with our discourse. We are capable now of a world without hunger. We are capable now of a world without war. We are capable now of a world without homelessness. And the question becomes, why aren't we doing it yet? Why isn't it happening? What are the things holding us back? Why aren't we pushing the 5 big buttons sitting on the table in front of us that could end these things tomorrow? We've had technologies and techniques and know-how and even material abundance for decades. These buttons have been sitting on our table, and none of us are pushing them as individuals. None of us are pushing them as teams or groups. And I'd like to figure out why. I'd like to discuss what I think. I'd like to hear what you think. And I'd like us to talk about it. So that's about as compressed as I can make it. In short, again, this is a podcast about solutions. This is a podcast about cutting away the fat in our discussions, in our conversations, and getting right down to the leanest possible focus and getting straight to the solutions. What are the solutions that improve the human experience and save human lives? If we distill our discourse down to those things and we treat those things like they are all that matters, then I think we might be able to get somewhere beautiful, actually. I am your host, Rufus Reed. I live in the United States, and so my perspective comes largely from the United States. As you will find out from listening to me rant, I do not have the kind of money or time, therefore freedom, to travel or have lots of, different varied experiences. I consider myself a very simple person. I consider myself a very average person. I don't have this grand list of stories. I don't have enough life experience to fill a book or a biography. I just consider myself some dude. I'm just a guy. And I'd like us to have a chat. So in this first episode, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to express myself to you and express some of my feelings and some of my disappointment and dissatisfaction with our current political discourse. This is for now a solo podcast, but I hope to include you sometime soon. If this can continue, if this grows, then hopefully this is a discussion that becomes much more involved. While it's a solo podcast, you'll just have one person's opinion to listen to. But very soon, hopefully, you and I will talk directly. I think we may be able to produce something quite beautiful here, and I think we may be able to find answers in each other that we are not able to find in our leadership. All right. Essentially, how I define higher discourse, it comes from the fact that I would like to make a difference. I would like to make a change in the world. I'd like to be a positive influence on the world around me. The problem is that I don't really see an outlet for that positivity, not one that I can perfectly agree with or align with. It's tough when you really want to make a difference and you'd like to make a change and you'd like to help. But everywhere I look, there's bickering, there's, politics, there's argument, and none of it, very little of it, is about new ideas and solutions. And to find discussions about new ideas and solutions, it's hell. It's tough. It's a struggle to find any conversation about new ideas and solutions, problem solving, getting over or past old problems. And that's frustrated me so much that I've sort of escaped to what I call higher discourse. Hopefully this becomes a discussion between you and I, but even if it doesn't, failing that, this will at least be my safe haven, my personal safe haven to discuss ideas, to mention new ideas, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them, somewhere in between. But the point is, I just don't want to join in to these political discussions that are only about finger pointing. There's a sort of sports debate when it comes to our politics here in the United States. There's a sort of soap opera type of atmosphere to it. And none of it seems to be about actually solving problems or reaching resolutions or coming to some sort of new, some kind of new reckoning. It's all about argument. It's all about debate. It's all about everyone canceling each other out. And I just see that as so childlike. I've never wanted to really be a part of it. That doesn't mean that I'm a human being who doesn't want to change things, who doesn't want to make a difference. I just don't identify with the way other individuals, and I suppose you could say the political leadership, the way they propose making a difference, right? I don't see that other side or the other team as the problem. I see the whole system as a problem, and finding discussions about the system, hunting those down online and hunting those down, in the podcast community. It's a very difficult thing to hear people who are all about critiquing just the system, the game itself, right? The rules of the game and the fundamentals of how this thing works. I want to be a part of change. And this is just me personally speaking for myself. But that change is hard when you can't see or can't find people to join who aren't pissed off at other people. I don't want to join a team or a club that's pissed off at those other people. And that's where a lot of my sort of apathy has come from. For the longest time, I've wanted to make a difference, and I've felt like making a difference. I've had my opinions, but I've kept them to myself because in a lot of cases, it's difficult to talk about change. It's difficult to talk about growth. And it's difficult to talk about society without people making assumptions about whose team you're on, and without people sort of jumping to conclusions about what argument you're saying before you even say it. And you can't even mention a book you've read without sort of ad hominem and pro hominem arguments coming up. And it's just become so difficult to talk to people that generally I choose not to. Generally, I stay away from it. But that doesn't mean that I'm someone who doesn't want to make a difference. And I wonder sometimes who else out there is like me, who would do things and participate in making a difference, but just doesn't really see themselves as part of these groups that are out there doing it, right? How many other people are like myself who look at the political atmosphere and are a little bit turned off by it, or a little bit disgusted by it? Here in the United States, I can't speak for any other places, but it's a joke to look at the political leaders we have and the politicians and say, okay, these are the guys and gals who are going to save the world. If I want to make a difference, I've got to, join forces with them and fight for the things they're fighting for. Well, I just don't see that any of the things that I experience when I look at or listen to these politicians. I just don't see any of it as being substantive. I don't want to be a part of it. And in that sort of rejection, I've had to say, if I want to make a difference, I'm going to have to be that change that I want to see in the world. And I'm not pretending to be the only one. There's a grand conversation taking place right now all over the world, all over the internet, where people are discussing the system at large, and they are critiquing the actual game we were all born into and the problems with it, the functional defects in this system. But I also have a sort of dissatisfaction with hearing these people speak, and their words are not my words. I have a hard time living vicariously through these individuals because oftentimes there's still that infamous other. There's still that other team, those other people that are the problem. And there's this illusion that if we just fix those people, then all the world will rejoice and everything will be better. I don't really buy that. I don't think that's actually the end game. I don't think that any focus on other people is really how we're going to make the difference we all want to see. And I also don't agree with the people who want to see a difference where they see the other team defeated. I think that in so many ways, we've kind of lost sight of what it means to have a new idea and what it means to have a solution to a problem. And I just want to have my own voice here because I'm kind of losing my mind sitting around waiting on that conversation to become what I want it to be. If I want that conversation to be something, then guess what? I need to participate in that conversation. I need to perpetuate that conversation. And that's why I've created my own little safe haven, and hopefully you'll join me in time. But I've created my own little safe haven for that discussion. Because someone somewhere needs to continue the idea that we're not done yet. There's still changes to be made. There's still improvements to be made. And blaming each other is not the direction I want to go in. Blaming each other is not what I see as a solution. So if you stick with me, yeah, I'll be honest, for these first several episodes, it'll probably be me ranting, but hopefully it can be a discussion. Hopefully, we can sort of form of a kind of solution-based community where we can discuss and exchange ideas about making a difference. I feel like a fairly average person. I don't want to ever become a politician. I don't want to become some sort of, political player. I think the whole game of politics is a relatively false one. That's my personal feelings on it. It's a whole lot of talk and a whole lot of soap opera and a whole lot of sports, but it's not a whole lot of actual action and change. It seems like it's more entertainment than it is change or action or fixing things or solutions, right? And I have no interest in being a part of it. But hopefully, eventually in time, myself as a regular, average, everyday person can communicate with other people who aren't necessarily interested in being politicians, who aren't necessarily interested in grabbing, signs and running out to a street corner and screaming at a building. What else can we do? That's not to say that there's no value in those things, but there's got to be something more that regular, everyday people can do. I'm an individual who personally works 60 to 70 to 80 hours every week, and it's extremely difficult for me to run out and be a part of some activist march. I may sympathize and feel, a sense of solidarity to whatever they're fighting for, but I don't necessarily believe that is the be all end all of what we need to do to change. I feel that regular everyday folks like myself who do want to make a difference, there's got to be more that we can do. And I want to be a part of that conversation. I want to be a part of figuring that out. And that's really where the origins of this came from. Honestly, I made this, I expected this to be a YouTube channel far back in like 2016 or something, and I created it, but I never really invested the time that I needed to because of that same issue, that displeasure at sort of participating in a way that made me fall into some group. I really don't see that alignment with a specific group as being all that helpful, because I only see the one group, and it's us sort of destroying ourselves. And I want to do what I can to sort of bring some healing and some resolution to that problem. And I don't think joining some specific team, and that team has enemies that it's had since before I was born, and now that I've joined that team, I've got those same enemies. I just think that's a complete waste of time and ultimately a distraction to actually solving real problems. So what Higher Discourse is about, I guess in summary, it's about a discussion of solving problems without blame. It's a discussion about new ideas without finger pointing. What can we do as regular individuals who aren't participating in the traditional forms of action? What can we do? What does new action look like? What does better, more effective action look like? What does quicker and faster action look like? And how can we as individuals be a part of it, especially given our daily lives consumed by work, family, and other things? There's got to be other things we can do and other ways we can participate without necessarily falling in line with these old ways of sort of bickering endlessly, joining into these sort of empty debates and whining and crying on television about whose team is right and whose team is wrong. And if we can just fix these other guys on this other team, then all of a sudden the world will be a better place, right? That's an illusion. And more than anything, it's a distraction, because this is something that's been going on since anyone on earth was born. Right? I refuse to be born into a fight, born onto a team, and now I'm born into the enemies of the team that was there before me, just because I was born onto that team. And now I'm supposed to fight them until I die. And then I'm supposed to pass the fight on to my child for them to fight until they die, and so on. Well, I'm convinced that we don't necessarily have the luxury of time. And so a discussion needs to be happening on some level that is genuine and that is focused entirely on the solution without blame. That focus on the future and the determination to get there, to figure out and peel apart everything we need to dissect and peel apart to find out how to achieve this thing, how to get to a better life, a better world. And on some level, we're going to have to raise the discourse. We're going to have to sort of elevate ourselves out of the old bickerings. And if we can't manage to do that, then we've got to assume we're only going to get as far as those before us got. We're only going to achieve the limits of what they achieved because we're fighting within the same framework. It's like, you know, if you are born and raised into a system that gives you a sword, and you're only going to have that sword to fight with for your entire life. And that's only going to get you as far as a sword can get you. That's not going to be a gun. It's not going to be a lightsaber. It's not going to be a phaser, right? Whatever higher technology there is, you were born into a sword and you're going to live by that sword and then you're going to die by that sword. And that sword will only ever be a sword. We're going to be suffering the same limitations as those we inherited our fight from. That's what I'm trying to get at. I mean, maybe it's a poor analogy, but I don't necessarily want to suffer those same limitations. That's why I don't want to join the old fights, because those old fights have gone as far as they can go. There is now this perfect negating effect. Each side perfectly cancels out the other side so that in the end, nothing's really changing. And that's a problem. That's a major, major problem if it's true that we need to change what we're doing on this planet, in this world, with each other and with our, ecosystem, with our finances, right? With our money. We've got to change so much and we're running out of the opportunity to make those changes, right? And I think it's a little bit foolish of us to continue fighting within the framework and boundaries and rules of the old battles and expecting new victories. We're not going to get those new victories from the old ways. And the old ways are what we see every time we turn on the television, every time we turn on our radios and podcasts, every time we listen to these people bickering and fighting like children, every time we buy their books where they're bickering and fighting like children, where everything is hyperbole and sports and soap opera and show. What does it matter what that politician did and how he cheated on his wife or some scandal he's a part of? What does it matter when we've got people over here down the street who are dying? What does it matter when we've got people across the country who are dying, when we've got people across overseas who are dying, right? We've got major problems that we're not facing, right? Resource depletion, economic and, ecological collapse. We've got social collapse. We've got problems, if we choose to pay attention to them, that are relatively undeniable. So why would we continue to participate in those old, locked up, locked down bickerings that have proven that they get nowhere? For the last 100 years, they've proven that they get nowhere. For the last 200 years, they've proven that they get nowhere. And for us to voluntarily participate in that, we're practically begging to make the same limited progress and be stifled by the same walls and boundaries, and then to pass on that same fight to our children for them to take up that old, dull sword, that dulled blade, and we're asking them to fight for their lives and go through their entire lives doing the same thing. Well, what does victory look like? Real, true, ultimate victory. What does it look like? Is it more bickering and fighting? Is it writing another book? Is it winning that next election? Is that it? Is it earning another right in the laws from that next march or protest? What is victory? What does it look like? What does justice look like? How do I fight in a way that I don't doom my children to have to fight the same way? Right? What is real justice? What is real progress? What is it? I think we fairly often fail to even define it, much less think of new ideas of how to aim higher and grasp it. So I know I'm ranting, but, again, I'm begging your forgiveness here. Until you join me in a conversation, that's pretty much what each episode will be. Hopefully I can stick to one particular subject here and there, but that's essentially what this will be. We've got to start raising the discourse higher, and we've got to have real discussions about real solutions. And I'm giving you a hint right now. I highly doubt blaming anybody else, any other group of people, no matter their color, no matter how much money they have, blaming any other group of people is not the way forward. I can guarantee. Because those people were not the creators of the game. They may be winners of the game, but they're not the creators of the game. And it's difficult to blame the winner of the game for seeing no problem with the game. That's called bias. It's extremely difficult within a biased perspective to judge or criticize that which is giving you advantages, that which is lifting you up, that which is supporting and aiding you. It's very difficult to criticize or see flaws or problems in that. And it just so happens that the broken rules of this game also state that the only people who can manipulate the rules are the winners themselves. And so it becomes this perpetuating cycle. So it's not really going to be terribly productive to point the finger at any particular group and blame them when we've got a system problem. We've got a problem with the board game itself and the rules set out before anybody else was born into that game. We've got a system problem at the core. And we are going to have to raise our discourse higher. We're going to have to raise it up and keep it up and relentlessly critique and discuss and focus on changing that system itself, the fabric of that system itself. Or we will just continue walking around in circles, making no progress, the world crumbling around us. And our only option is going to be to either be apathetic to survive it emotionally, join the teams, whichever one we think is the right one to make the world a better place, and then we'll blame the other team for making the world a worse place. Or we can get honest and say to ourselves, there's got to be something we're not discussing. There's got to be angles and ways of looking at this thing that we're not discussing. And that's what I want to be a part of. I want to be a part of that discussion. I want to be a part of that focused attention to fix the problems. All right. And that's it for this episode. I'd like to finish off by talking about 3 scientists. So I'd like you to imagine there is a spaceship in outer space traveling in between the stars, and there are 3 scientists aboard and no one else. Now, 2 of these scientists have started arguing because the software in charge of their life support system is failing. And so one is blaming the other. They're both very angry. They're very upset with each other. And they spend quite a long time bickering and arguing and frustrated with each other. There's a 3rd scientist in the room who's just thinking, we're going to die if you guys keep arguing. And he tries to get in on this and talk to them and say, listen, there's a more important priority than who's wrong. See, the first 2 scientists are just trying to assign blame. That's their top priority. Neither one of them wants the software issues to be their fault because, you see, these 3 scientists were in charge of writing this program. Unfortunately, the 3rd scientist fails to get their attention and to get their priorities in check. The 3rd scientist eventually just ignores them and starts going through the code line by line. To some degree, He has to educate himself on programming, educate himself on software, educate himself on life support systems, because that was not his original assignment on the ship. That was the job of the two scientists who are arguing with each other. They were the ones in charge of programming the thing, understanding the code, maintaining the software, etc. But eventually, if they're going to live, if these three scientists drifting through outer space are going to survive, the third scientist is going to simply have to ignore them. And someone is going to have to take the responsibility to go through the code line by line, figure it out, find what's wrong, and correct it. If no one on the ship is doing the work of going through the code, they're all going to die. And enough energy has already been expended into trying to get the attention of these other two scientists who seem mostly intent on arguing with each other rather than addressing the code itself. So the reason I say all that is we're going to have to be the third scientist in that scenario. The arguing and the blaming and the assigning of fault. I mean, we're going to have to get past that, and someone somewhere is going to have to do the work of going through the code line by line. It's arduous, it's tedious, but it's life-saving work. And I think that if we work together, there are a lot of third scientists out there who aren't interested in arguing anymore, who aren't interested in the bickering and jumping into the ring to have it out and break even every single time we come to a sort of deadlock. And I think that that deadlock is killing us. And I think that if we can all be that third scientist and we can find each other and work together, it's not easy work to go through that code. It's not easy work to learn that code. But I think that's the work we need to be doing. We need to be focusing directly on solutions to the problem rather than assigning blame and drifting further into outer space and getting closer to dying because the life support systems failed. Someone somewhere has to do the work. And the work doesn't involve blaming. The work involves fixing, error correcting. And that code has flaws in it that we need to go through, figure out, educate ourselves, and correct. So I'm inviting you to join me. Help me out. I'll help you out. We need to be the third scientist, and we need to work together as best we can to crack this code. So with that being said, you can contact me. I don't have much contact information at this point. This is very new. But right now you can contact me on Twitter at HigherDiscourse, or by email. You can contact me higherdiscoursepodcast@gmail.com, higherdiscoursepodcast@gmail.com. Or like I said, Twitter at HigherDiscourse. For now, that's all the contact information I have, and let's get to it.